All right. I want to welcome everybody to episode 73, The Power of the New Creation, an interview with Chris Martinez. Now, before I introduce Chris, I want everybody to know that I recently, I guess you could say, came into contact with Chris's story via a youth rally. Chris and I attend the same congregation, and I had many people, he was telling his story to these kids. I had many people come to me and tell me that I needed to have Chris on this podcast because his story was tremendous. So this will be a first for me hearing the story too. Now, why would I put somebody on whose story I haven't heard? Well, because I trust the sources coming to me. That's why. And at some point, you just you gotta put out there. And it sounds to me like Chris has a story worth telling. And like Chris and I were talking about just before, if it helps one person, it's a story worth putting out there. And I'm excited to hear it. And I think you guys will get a ton from it because to me, what the parts that I've heard, like I said, I haven't heard the story, but the pieces that I was told exemplify new creation stuff. And I think you've heard me hammer it, move away from the sinner forgiven model, move into the new creation model. It's the actual scriptural model. So with that, Chris Martinez, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And if you want to move right into your story, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, hi, folks. My name is Christopher Martinez. I'm a current resident in Manhattan, Montana. Moved here a couple years ago based on a prayer. And we'll get to that here in just a few minutes towards the end of the story. But it started back in 1980 when, of course, I was born in 1980. And then right around 84, that's my earliest memory is when my sister had passed away. It was actually the night before she passed away. Me and my brother, my mom, were all having some fun, throwing popcorn around, and it was a really fun night. And of course, the next morning, everybody wakes up, and we just hear my mom screaming. My sister had passed away in her sleep. She was only about 3.5 months old. She had a hole in her brain. And back then, you couldn't detect any of that stuff. My real dad was actually out robbing houses at the time. He came, I guess he was just standing right outside when he heard my mom scream. He came in and realized, my sister had passed away. From that point on, my mom went through a really bad depression. With her depression, my dad had gone to jail for robbing the houses, of course, and drugs. She got up and moved us to Sacramento. And we were living kind of right next door to my grandmother, which she was a feisty Mexican lady where, anybody messed with their grandchildren, she'd be right there on them, and any kids messed with us. So we had turned around and lived there for at least about a year in Sacramento. But right about 5 years old, my cousin Donnie had come to stay with us. And that's where my mom was still in a really bad depression. She was sleeping all day long. She, of course, her husband was in jail, and, she just lost a child, and it had to have been very, very hard for her. I can only imagine what it would be like for her. She'd sleep all day. And then my cousin, when he came to stay with us, he started to molest me. And that happened for a good week. And he had actually tried to get my brother as well at that time. Well, my brother went and told my mom. And my mom had, of course, questioned me about it. And then she had called the cops. He took off running. She called the cops, and he went to jail for about 6 years from that point on. Mm-hmm. We were constantly moving around. We were constantly back and forth from that time on. It even made my mom even more depressed because, she's realizing that, hey, that couldn't have happened if, she wasn't already depressed. So she just kept getting further and further into it. And depression is a real, real sickness. It can affect anybody at any time. We constantly moved around. Right around 2011, that's when my Nana passed away. And we were actually staying on my uncle's living room floor at that time. My cousin Donnie had got paroled to the same house we were staying at again.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
That's a system
So
at work for you. Yeah.
yeah, back then the system was a lot different. So
Yeah.
he got paroled back to that same residence. And so, of course, he had started giving us, he had pretty much 6 years to plan what he was going to do next.
Right.
How he was going to get at me and my brother again. It was kind of more of like a revenge thing at that point. And in between these times, give or take, I was always finding myself wandering around, being, the lonely kid. And after my nana passed away, I started really acting out. I felt alone. I felt lost. My mom still continued to sleep in. And it was really, really hard without any kind of structure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, with my uncle, or with living on his floor, my cousin getting out, he started giving us alcohol. That was the first thing, give us a little bit of alcohol. And then he started putting drugs in our drinks. So at 11 years old, I became an addict. 11 years old, it's really, really hard. Your mind's kind of really developing as of that point. It's kind of, you don't really know what to do. Being up for days, not knowing what to do, going crazy in your own mind. And let me tell you, being on drugs when you're trapped in your own mind can be just as bad as hell.
Yeah.
Literally, I mean, if I can imagine hell, that's pretty much it. Just being trapped in there and not knowing what to do or how to do it. So we had turned around, and he kept continuous to give us the drugs. And that's when he started, of course, raping me and my brother over and over again. I did try to tell my mom and my grandmother what was going on, but he, of course, said, well, no, they're on drugs, and they blamed it on the drugs. I started acting out a lot. And then there was even a time where I even tried to kill him, after him with a knife. And I was acting out. I was throwing tantrums. Right when I turned 12 years old, though, his friend was actually a cop. And of course, him being gay, he turned around and had his cop friend had me committed to a hospital for, of course, acting out and trying to kill him, because I was trying to tell people what he was doing. The first hospital I went to, for about a week, I was really, really, really like crying and emotional, and just I was coming down off the drugs and everything else. At the second part of the stay, at the second week, I'd actually realized I was kind of safe there. I was actually safe, and they were feeding me, and I was being good, and they would take us swimming and stuff like that.
You had structure.
After I'd gotten, yeah, it was structure. Exactly. It was something that I needed. After I got out the second time, or the first time, I, of course, he started doing it again. And there was even times to where he even tried to take us away from my mom because of her depression. He was trying to literally, adopt us and stuff like that. And I'm just thinking that, oh, wow. Like, I look back at it now, and I'm just thinking that could have been really, really bad.
Yeah.
After the first time getting out, though, I turned around and started acting out again, a lot more, even worse than the first time. So they took me to this place called Van Nuys Hospital, and I met Dr. Sherpin, which was a phenomenal doctor. I mean, he, after being there for about a day, he did an evaluation on me, and he had realized that there was something wrong, that there was something more to the story that he didn't know about. And he'd asked me, he's like, hey, has anybody touched you? Are you being hurt? And then, of course, I just in silence said nothing, did nothing. And he's like, you've already tried to tell somebody, haven't you? They didn't believe you. He's like, if you want to tell me, I will believe you. But if not, I believe that something's going on with you more than meets the eye, and you're welcome here anytime. So throughout the few years, I went back 12 different times. And it's to the point to where they took us on outings. They had fun with us. They played games with us. The staff was really friendly and spent time with us. So it was kind of like having a family.
Yep.
That was like, I was protected and I was safe. But during these times, I remember a lot of the times that my older brother had had taken a lot of the abuse from my cousin for me. He had made sure that I was always away and gone.
Mhm.
And of course, to this day, my brother is still missing. Nobody's heard from him since 2009.
Oh,
So
wow.
nobody's seen him since 2003.
Mhm.
So it's the abuse took a lot bigger toll on him than anything. It was a continuous acting out, though. It was continuously going for years. It wasn't until I was right about 14 years old that my stepdad had came into my life.
Mhm.
Um, and we became friends at first, and then he got introduced to my mom, and then it was like, hey, this guy is awesome. Like, he's really protective and everything else. There was one final time where we went out to a party, um, with my cousin, and he brought me home, and my stepdad. That's where it finally ended. As of that point,
Mhm.
where he and I can't even use the word stepdad. I want to use the words dad, because blood does not defer people that care about you, people that are there for you.
I agree.
He's like,
Absolutely.
yeah, he's my dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, he that final night, though, he had pretty much told him, get away from him, leave him alone. He's fine. We got him. Because I gotten injured, and from that point on, the abuse finally stopped. Um, I turned out to be a really good kid for the next couple of years, and then of course my dad and my mom had a baby together, and he started stripping down the rules a little bit more instead of being more my friend. And I
Mhm.
kind of rebelled a lot against him, and I rebelled a lot, and I put him through some hell, literally, for that. Like, I
Yeah.
made him, like, sneak out at night, sneaking my friends in, going partying, drinking, and then always finding the drugs again.
Yeah.
And of course he's like, you need to stop this, and ditching school. Um, it was up to a couple years afterwards to where I finally settled settling down more. When right about I was 18, um, my my first girlfriend had gotten pregnant with our first kid, which was Mason, and um, of course I still found a way to get into drugs even more again. There was one time where I was working so much, I was working up to 15, 16-hour days, 17-hour days, to try to be that father that my father really wasn't, my real dad wasn't, and try not to go down the same paths. But I would exhaust myself and go right back to the drugs. Um,
Mhm.
Turn around, and I come home one day for lunch, and Mason's literally got her arms up, taking her first steps towards me, and I walk right past her. Just walk right past, and even my ex had looked at me, and she's like, "Chris, she's walking. Like, look at her." And I felt so bad for that, and of course, it put me into a depression for realizing that I was doing exactly what my dad was doing.
Mhm.
Uh, Eventually, that relationship kind of came to an end. A few months later, I found myself in the next relationship. Um, Always getting into trouble in between these times too, like always continuously going back. Um, when I got to the next relationship, of course, I got into that relationship using drugs, and then I quit using drugs for a while. And then, of course, somehow I just always found them again. They always found me. Um, Turned around, and it got to the point where there was a lot of fighting, fighting with parents, fighting between us. And let me tell you, there was no God or Jesus or churches in our lives, and I had no structure. Once again, I thought I was just doing a good job. Um, it got to the point to where I was hanging out with these guys, and not knowing that they were actually involved in a game. They just kind of kept that part quiet.
Well, of
Right
course.
after we had split, yeah, exactly, yeah. And then right after me and her had split up, of course, all the guys kept moved into my apartment, and it got to the point where, yeah, it got to the point where it was like I was driving them around. They were doing their drug deals, and they had turned around, and it was constant fights between them and me throughout the night, every single night. It was a constant fight, constant fight, constant fight. Um, and then I'm talking fist fighting too.
Yeah.
This happened for a while. Then eventually the power got shut off and everything. And I was literally just living there with no power, no nothing, in a depression. Finally get up. I start changing my life around, once again, start doing a bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
And finally moved into a place that I really didn't feel too comfortable with, because during the time that I was getting, raped by my cousin, I reported my uncles for molesting my cousins.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like that's pretty much all on my mom's side of the family, where they were doing that. But I didn't have any other place to go. I didn't have any other choice. So I kind of moved in there for weeks, got out of there as soon as possible, and then moved in with some neighbors that I kind of met down the street. Had some kids, and I was just walking home. Kids were just like, "Hey, Chris, you want to play with us?" And I'm like, "How do you guys even know my name?" They're like, "We know you." So, I started having fun with them, and then like eventually I started talking with the family more, and they were like, "Just move in here. You can sleep on the floor. There's room for you." So I did that for a while. Eventually getting back with, my ex again, and we had already had a baby together, so we were back together for a while, and things were going good.
Mm-hmm.
Things were going really good. I was actually driving city buses, got a B license, and even during the time of the city buses, like they gave me the most enthusiastic award, right? Because I'm always so excited and so hyper, and so ready to go. And with the award, they were like, the reason why drug tests were invented.
Yeah.
But he's passed every single one, So, you know, uh, usually if I'm on drugs, I kind of go into a corner and I hide and I isolate, and there's really no seeing me. There's no being around me. Um, so I was doing really, really good. And then I started working for my ex's family, over at a equipment rental company. Once again, found myself working 19 to 20 hours a day.
Jeez.
Yeah, with working so much, of course, again, the drugs had found me again. They were just there. And I was just like, wow.
Yep.
So got into it again, really, really bad. Me and her eventually split up once again.
Yeah.
She had left me she says that they're not blood related, but they were raised as cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So she had left me for who she calls her second cousin. Um,
Sorry.
it's okay. It's all right.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we had, from that point on, I had so many problems trying to have a relationship with my daughter, with her. And to this day, I rarely see Alyssa, rarely talk to her. She doesn't really want to talk to me. Her mom is always right there, always wanting to get involved, always wanting to blame everything just on me, instead of letting me try to prove what I've become from this day forward, or from a few years ago. It's been really, really hard to try to keep a relationship with her and talk with her and be there with her. So that 2 weeks later, I had met a girl at a gas station, and I actually was like, "Hey, you're pretty cute. Can I get your number?" You know, she gave it to me, and I was like, "Okay," And the number had fallen between my seat, so I lost it for a few days, and then I found it when I was cleaning out my truck, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, you're really cute." Or I text her, I call her, and she's like, she hangs up on me right away,
Yeah.
and she's like, she texts back, and she's like, "Sorry, I just didn't expect you were gonna call." Like, so we started talking, and then literally the next day, she comes over, and we were together for 8 years from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
But as we first started together, um, the first few months were really, really good, really good. It was, she was hanging out with Mason, with my oldest, and I come home one day from work, and they were cooking dinner, and she had made breakfast for dinner, and it was as black as my Bible cover. Okay. So it was her first time really cooking, and she's like, "Did I do a bad job?" And I'm like, "I'll order the pizza." So, and she started crying, and I gave her a hug, and I told her it's going to be okay. So the first few months, I mean, it kind of went like that for the first few months. You know, it was really good. We hung out, we talked. Um, right about the 6th or 7th month, though, the fighting started. The name calling, and this was on her part because she was raised in that type of environment.
Right.
And then her calling, and then my drug use, it was not a good mixture because then as soon as she started putting me down, the first thing I wanted to do was go back to the drugs.
Yep.
So when you're kind of putting these two together, it's a very bad mixture. It was constant fighting, constant drug use throughout the next 8 years. I would get clean. I would stop using. She would stop fighting so much, but then she would start fighting again. Then I would start using again. There was even to the point where even in the kids, she would, say, "Hey, you're not a good father. You're a bad father. You're a horrible father. You don't deserve to be a father." When you hear words like that, already being an addict, you just kind of want to go use. You just feel low. Addicts need to feel inspired. They need to feel. Yeah, it does. It hurts, and it hits you down, and it's like, I'm okay with calling myself, but when other people are like, "You're just a drug addict," it kind of really hurts. It's like, hey, I have a purpose just like you do. I have a life. I can be better. So it got to the point to where it was constant splitting up back and forth, splitting up back and forth. Wasn't until right about, I would say, 2009 where DCFS got involved for the first time, where we were all split up, and I had started going to Church of the Open Bible in Palmdale.
Right.
Now, it was a good church. So my friend had got me into it. He's like, "You need to come to church. You need to come to church." It was actually a longtime friend named Charles and his son. They're like, "You need to come to church. You need to come to church." And then eventually I started going. So we had started going, and it was really good at first. Everything had seemed to stop. The drug use, the fighting, everything was just at a complete standstill in my life for once. And it felt like there was a lot of structure. It felt really, really good. And I mind you, at these times, I've gotten in trouble. I've gotten arrested for drug use, and I had to do diversions and everything else.
Yeah.
When we went to church, they of course they'd ask, of course, do I want to accept the Holy Spirit in my life and everything else? And I said, yeah, let's do it, not really knowing what I was really getting into. They were just kind of really, really fast about everything, getting baptized, getting all this other stuff. So I still really didn't have that much knowledge of what I was getting into at all. So I did, and during this time, me and Marissa were going through counseling, and with DCFS, they wanted us to do counseling. So we did it. We were like, look, we want to do it spiritually with the church. They're like, okay, we'll accept it as long as you guys see a counselor at least once a month, but you have to continue to give us progress letters. Right. So, because I told them, like, we have a spiritual, way of belief of doing this, and they can't reject that. So they accepted it. The judge accepted it. And during this time, of course, the fighting started here and there again. And with Marissa, she asked me not to say anything to our friends. It was Ricardo and Yolanda about the fighting. They're like, "Don't say we're fighting. Don't say we're fighting." And I made the mistake because I shouldn't have protected it. I shouldn't have allowed it to go. Mm-hmm. Of course, that just made things worse. But then we got married, and the fighting continued a little bit. We moved in with her sister for a good 6 months. We were, becoming roommates. Right. We moved in there with her. We got a house, nice 4-bedroom house. And when I was working for Sunbelt Rentals, I had gotten injured, and they had forced me to work literally on the job. They forced me to work with the cast, driving truck, everything else. Injured my leg even worse. So they pretty much were saying, "Look, we're just going to fire you," So I did a lawsuit against them. Yeah. For, my disability on my ankle to work because stitches kept ripping and everything else. They turned around and they gave me $185,000 for the disability.
Wow.
So me and Marissa bought a house, completely just cashed house. Bought a house, paid off a lot of our debt. We decorated the house. Things were up and down for a while, and I got to the point where I was about 3.5 years clean while living at the house, but the fighting never stopped. It was constantly going, constantly going. And my biggest mistake during the fighting was I would always walk away. And yeah, it's her fault for the fighting as well, but she'd kind of given me answers too on what to do. You know, hey, maybe if I'm angry, just give me a hug. You know, and I was more prideful than anything, and I would just walk away. Hey, I don't want to deal with you right now. You're in a state, I don't want to deal with you. And maybe that would have changed a lot of things. Maybe that would have made a big difference if I would have just listened instead of just being prideful.
Right.
So it got to the point where the drug use started again a little bit. And actually, it's really, really hard. Not a little bit. That's really a bad understatement. It got to the point where it started really, really bad. It got to that point where the fighting had gotten even worse. The drug use had gotten worse because I had met some friends and they had taught me how to. Well, one friend had actually taught me how to, for the first time ever, shoot up. And you know, with doing that my friend had taught me, she had said, look, if you buy your own needles, don't ever take a needle from anybody, don't ever share a needle, you'll live. You won't catch anything. So I lived by those 3 rules. I lived by them to a T, because you can go to Walgreens, even in California, and they have what's called the Safe Needle Program. Yeah, you can actually buy them for $5. You know, so it's like, yeah. So I lived by those rules like tremendously. And that made like the feeling that it gave you was tremendous. And I thought it was the best feeling in the world. So with fighting and then shooting up, of course, it got really, really, really bad. A lot of the fighting, holes in the wall. She would constantly corner me, but instead of hitting her, I would try to hit the walls. I would put holes in the walls. It got to the point where one night, and I had blocked out a lot of my cousin's abuse as of that point. Yeah. I blocked it out. I just completely set up barriers. I didn't remember a single thing about it, and it didn't bother me. Right. And I was good. Where she had pushed her way through a door, and I had just brought all those memories back. And I put her into a chokehold when she did not realize it was her. And I was squeezing and squeezing and squeezing, and then she just tapped me, saying it's going to be okay. And then I let go, realizing it was her. I had actually went to treatment as of that point on. I started going to treatment, trying to go to treatment high, trying to get, you know, to get off the drugs. I was like, I need to really get off of this. Like it was, my addiction had come to a whole new level. With me trying to go to treatment, her fighting was still going though. And then it got to the point to where one night she was fighting with me so hard and hitting me, I'd actually called the cops. And the cops come. And in California, they get the calls in cop cars. So they hear everything that's going on. Yeah. They hear everything that's going on right then and there. The cops had come, and the girl instantly goes in, grabs her, handcuffs her, puts her in the car, because they'd already know what was going on. The guys were questioning me. As they were questioning me, to protect her, because the kids were looking right up at me. Right. And they were crying. And the cop, like, did she hit you? Because they need to hear physically that they hit you. You know, they could see marks on my face. Right. They could see that, you know. And I said, no, I hit her first. Oh. And yeah. I had said that because I didn't want the kids to see her go to jail. So the girl cop comes back in, and she's questioning me. She's like, no, we heard the call. We're not taking you to jail. We're not taking it. And the girl cop was really upset. She was really upset the fact that I wouldn't admit that she hit me.
Yeah.
So of course they called their watch commander and their sergeant over. They come over and they're like, she's talking to them. She's like, we're not taking him to jail. We're not taking the wrong person to jail. No, we heard what was going on. So they'd ultimately made the decision to say, hey, look, let her stay here, and we're going to let you leave. Grab your stuff, and you're okay to leave. So I did. I went to a hotel for a couple days. About a week later, I actually had finally my surgery on my shoulder that I've been waiting on. Because I couldn't even move my arm. I had a pinched nerve. I couldn't even move my arm above my head. Right. And it really, really hurt. And I needed to get it done. And at that point, I was clean for like 3 or 4 days. We get a knock at the door, and of course, it's Children's Services again. So they come in. They're asking for all the medical reports for my shoulder and all this other paperwork saying that I'm going to treatment. So with my left arm pretty much driving around trying to get all these reports, I didn't put the car fully in park on a hill at one of the doctor's offices. So I open the door and start to step out, take my foot off the brake. The car rolls back. Luckily, there's no other cars behind me, right? But the car kind of trembled over me a little bit. So I'm like, just screw this, and I went right back to the drugs.
Yeah.
They, of course, had tested me, and I tested positive. And then a lot of the times I wasn't even showing up to the test after that point. We eventually separated. We eventually just broke up. I was just living in the house, and of course, all the friends that I was hanging out with again were just back in the house. And it got to the point to where we started trying to fix up the house. I was trying to get her back in the house. I was trying to fix this marriage that had no structure, and I didn't know if it was going to be fixed or not. Well, we turned around and we just actually stayed separated. She didn't want to work on it. She didn't want to fix it. And during this time when all these guys were in the house and everything else, I eventually got so depressed at that house to where I just kept letting more and more people in, and I let a family squat in the house. And right before the family squatted in the house, though, right before the house was fully fixed up, we had a raid in the house because I was trying to get rid of everybody. I was trying to get rid of them. I was trying to just get the house back to normal. And I bought some jumpers too, like 8,000 worth of the bounce houses to try to rent them out. I was going to start my own business and be like, hey, I can do this again. I can make this work. And they turned around and they raided the house. I went to jail supposedly for running a dope house, which even in the police report, it says in the police report that informed informant Justin Perez placed the dope on the counter.
Right.
So one of the guys that was working for the guys that was dealing for me, or that I was actually dealing for, had got caught and set up my drug dealer.
Right.
And my attorney was like, look, I can get you off of this. I can get you off. You could tell that this is not you. We could just do a quick trial and you're good. And not to mention, let me go back a little bit too. A couple weeks prior, I got stabbed 7 times.
Oh.
Yeah. So a guy was stealing my chargers out of my car, and I caught him with it. And I was in the house with them over at a different house, and they had turned around, and I confronted him about it. Well, he got in my face and cornered me, and I felt threatened, so I hit him. I hit him. I started fighting. Not knowing he had a knife, he stabbed me while he was hitting me. And I didn't even know this until we got to the point to where we're on the ground, and I was hitting him, and all this blood was coming off of me, literally just rolling off and just literally hitting him on the face, like just splattering him everywhere. I went to the hospital and it was like 96 stitches total. He tried to stab me in my heart, stab me back of the head. He had sliced right here. You can still kind of see it too. There's a slice right where my eye is, right above. So, and then a slice here. During this time, I mean, I do believe that God was protecting me this whole time. You know, that something was protecting me. So when I finally, was in jail, my attorney was like, "Look, we can get you off." I didn't show back up to jail or to court for the next hearing for being stabbed. They wanted me to testify against the guy.
Right.
So they held me under contempt of court. So they threw me in county for 71 days. So I didn't want to testify. I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be involved in it. You know, I was already involved in a lot of other things that could have been worse for me. So they threw me in county for 71 days. And of course, the house I currently own is being squatted in.
Right.
They currently are, the bounce houses are getting ruined each time. I get out of jail. I try to go to the house. They're like, "No, you have no control over this house. You can't this house. We're renting this house." You know, and they'd already started receiving mail there and everything else. And of course, the cops are like, "You just have to start an eviction process."
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm kind of just staying, a few places here and there. And then I started dealing for a bigger guy that was from the other drug dealer because he was in jail as well. A guy had tried to set me up and take the drugs from me that night. And when he had tried to set me up, I called the bigger drug dealer, the bigger they call homies, to come over and help me out. And they'd ask, "Well, who's trying to set you up?" And I told them the guy's name. And then they showed me a picture of his face, and they're like, "Is this him?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Well, he's a rat. You brought him with you earlier?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "Okay." So they took me in the desert, and for about 15 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes, I kind of all went black as of a certain point. There was 4 giant Mexicans, like huge. You could picture as tall as Chris, but even built, more built, not as skinny. And they had beat me to death. By the time that they had drove away, I'm just laying in the desert, just laying there, and they're just kind of like, "I need to get up," but I don't want to.
So they thought
I just
you were
want to
dead.
die. They thought I was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had actually crushed in my ribs, broke my arm, crushed in my throat. So and my face just was unrecognizable. I couldn't even recognize it.
Right.
Turned around and I finally got up and I started walking and crawling. And by this time it's already like 5:30 in the morning. The sun's starting to come up. Walking by people and they're just looking at me.
Right.
And it was about a mile and a half to this welding shop. So it took a couple hours to get there.
I imagine.
So, and I'm going through this trailer park. Yeah. And this trailer park, people are just looking at me, but not a single person said, "Hey, are you okay?" So as I finally get through the trailer park, I get to the welding shop. The welding shop, I open the door and I ask him, I'm like, "Can I use your bathroom?" And just, there's a whole group of these guys and they're just like, you can see their faces. I remember their faces perfectly. They're just like, "Yeah, come on." So they show me where the bathroom is. I don't know how long I was in there for because I just remember looking in the mirror and just my entire face was completely swollen. Both eyes were already black, blood coming down everywhere. And I just tried to wash off my face and it hurt to touch it so bad. And then I'm realizing, I'm like, and I'm trying to breathe and I'm just realizing I can't breathe. I can't. I hear a knock at the door and I'm so scared to open that door. I don't want to open it. But I finally opened the door and then all the guys are just right there in a circle. And I'm just thinking, "Oh God, what's going to happen again? What's going to happen? Like this happen again?" One of the guys just comes over and just taps me on the shoulder and he's like, "Come on, let's go sit down. Use some water. Let's go sit down." So They get me over to a chair. And as of that point, I just fall over. And I wake up and I'm in an ambulance. And they're forcing air down my throat.
Mm-hmm.
Literally forcing air. Like they have a new machine, instead of just shocking you, where it can just force air and get air into you.
Yeah.
We start, the cops are there. They're trying to question me and everything. And then I remember the ambulance driver just sitting there saying, "We're losing him. We need to go. We need to go. No more questions." So we get to the hospital, and I remember waking back up in the hospital, and I just look up and I see the doctor. And the doctor says, "We need to incubate now. We're losing him. We need to incubate." That's when I woke up about 3 days later in ICU.
Mm-hmm.
When I woke up in ICU, I just had this tube down my throat. Not able to talk, barely able to see, barely, because my eyes are still swollen. They're still really, really swollen. I'm barely able to see anything. And I remember just kind of feeling and noticing that my face wasn't as bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just remember just saying, "Hey, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to surrender. Whatever you want to do, just do, please." A couple more days later, they finally just removed the tube. And I finally make my way back to the Church of the Open Bible.
Right.
I go back to the house that people were squatting with, and they take me to a hotel, and I still had enough cash to get a hotel for a couple nights, for a night. The next day it was Sunday, and I'm like, "Just take me to the church. Take me to the church." They had looked at me, and like when I walked in those doors, and they had just seen my eyes black and as skinny as I was, they were just like, "Wow." I was like, "I have nowhere to go." So they put me in a hotel for a couple days. On the second day, I was constantly calling Tarzana, constantly calling any other person that I knew to help me either get into a sober living home or into treatment. On the second day, though, Tarzana was not able to get me into inpatient. They tried so hard. They just did not have a bed available. So they turned around, and a lot of people had called the Hansted house.
Yeah.
They had called the Hansted house like no tomorrow. "Hey, Chris needs a place. Chris needs a place. Chris needs a place." It was either going to be the sober living or I was going into a homeless shelter. So finally, after enough calls, the Hansted house accepted me. The church went and dropped me off. And I stayed there for about 7 months, 7.5 months, going to outpatient treatment. I was going there 5 days a week. And then I was also doing meetings 3 times a day, NA meetings, just constantly going, constantly going, constantly going. I was so active, and most people aren't too happy about going into a sober living home.
Yeah.
They're not. They're like, yeah, I don't want to go to a sober. They said that I had the smile on my face like it was from ear to ear, like the Joker. Like I was happy. It was like a kid being at Disneyland. Because I realized I was finally gonna not, be homeless. I was gonna be okay at this point. People had started reaching out. As soon as I got there, they were like, "Hey, are you hungry? You need food." I found such a loving, caring environment. Like they wanted me to do better. They wanted me to be good. And they nicknamed me the Raccoon for having 2 black guys. So I was known as the Raccoon. They were like, "Yeah, you were the Raccoon." So I'd stay there for about 7.5 months, though, really active in my recovery and participating. It wasn't until I started working, though, at a car dealership again. And I prayed to God. I'd gone to the back, and I'm like, "Is this really what you want me to do again? Is this really where you want me to be? Is this really, where I'm supposed to stay?" And I'm like, "Just give me a sign, something, anything."
Yeah.
So I walk out to the car dealership, and literally a guy pulls up to the service drive, and he's like, "Hey, if you have anywhere else to go besides," because he was mad because of traffic, because he was late. He was like, "If you have anywhere else besides California, go, get out of here. You don't want to be here." So I kind of took that as a sign from God. I'm like, all right, So I have a lot of family here in Montana. So I literally moved here from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
And doing a podcast. I'll be within a few minutes.
You're good. It's all good.
No. Yeah. So I moved to Montana, to change my life around, and I went to the church in Churchill, and it was a lot of older people at first. I was kind of like, there's no younger people. There's nobody I can relate with here.
Right.
So then I Googled other churches and saw the Church of Christ and realized that there was a Church of Christ in Palmdale or Lancaster that I used to go to for meetings. So I went there, and I sat in the back, and everybody kind of seemed really friendly at first, really helpful, really, felt really good. And of course, Chris kept asking me for coffee. Hey, you want to get some coffee? No, I'm good.
Right.
Get some coffee. Like, I didn't really trust nobody. I didn't really know. And then eventually I said, yeah, let's go get coffee. That was about 1.5 years ago.
Yep.
And then life has been really. I've been volunteering at the homeless shelter because I've almost ended up there. I try to help out as many people as I can in any way I can. Just because I've had a bad past doesn't mean I can't care. And I've always cared about people. I've always wanted to go above and beyond for people, even if it's taken out of my own self. I've always wanted to be there. And then now it comes to today, to where, I'm learning scriptures of the Bible, going to the church camp for the first time, got to see the waterfalls. It's been a tremendous experience.
So do you feel then like you're where you're supposed to be now?
I have a feeling, yes. Even right now, since I actually recently quit Randash Auto Center.
Yeah.
Just things were going on there, but I feel that it was going to hurt my faith and hurt my sobriety to stay there.
Right.
The way things that were going on there. So I still left, but I'm still working part-time for Nate and Michelle Alstrom, the owners of Rose's Pizza. I'm still working part-time there. I'm making great tips, and I still have a lot of money saved up. So and I'm currently applying at other dealerships.
So it wasn't the dealership per se. It was just some of the things that you felt for you personally.
Some of the people there. Yeah. Correct. The way that things were.
And we don't need
done.
to name.
Yeah.
We don't need to name them. So.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I even put on my Facebook, because I have a lot of people from the dealership on my Facebook, like a lot of the customers, hey, I'm no longer working there. And they started putting down the dealership. And then I took that post down, and I even put another post up saying, look, the previous post was not to put anybody down. I don't want to do that. I don't want that on my Facebook. It's just to inform you, if you need some service issues, instead of messaging me or calling me, call them. You know?
Yeah.
You got to get in touch with them from here on out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that it wasn't the dealership. It's just, it's funny. I always say the perfect business involves no people. So,
yes.
So a perfect church, no people. So, so long as people are involved, there's always going to be issues. And I don't think we can deny that. So, I mean, the businesses themselves are not necessarily at fault. You're always going to find, well, maybe not always, but the majority of the time you're going to find a bad egg in there that's just going to, and you got to make a choice. And that was the choice you made. So, So here you are. Now, just a couple things. When you mentioned, and I didn't want to interrupt you, that's why I'm going to bring them up now. So DCS was the Department of Child Services, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then Chris, you made reference to Chris, obviously not yourself. Chris, the reference he made to Chris was Chris, our preacher Chris, who was about 6'5". So, so when he said these big dudes about the size of Chris, he's talking dudes that are well over 6 foot. And so you've got this tremendous. Okay, here's what I really want to point out. There's actually a couple things. Now, for one, really, and answer this. Do you feel that without God, you could have made the things happen you needed to make happen?
No.
Okay.
Not without God. No.
Yeah. Okay. Now I can attest. Now, I'll be honest. Chris and I, we haven't had a chance to really sit down and talk outside of this interview. But I'm a people watcher, and I do notice things. And I have always noticed that Chris is very active. Chris is always very smiley, always very happy, always in a good mood, and always willing to step up and help. And when I saw him at the youth rally, telling his story, it didn't surprise. Now, I didn't know he had a story, but it didn't surprise me that he would be sharing it. It didn't surprise me that he was actively involved. And I think that's part of what Chris does to keep himself on the straight and narrow. But a couple things I want to point out. For one, Chris's life does not reflect anything but new creation philosophy, because new creation says, I'm a new creature. I can do this. I have Christ with me, in me, and I don't have to walk it alone. And that's exactly what you started doing once you realized that. And that's what you continue to do to this day. You continue to strengthen the flesh because the spirit is already together. All right. You're already melded with Christ, and you know that the flesh can come into subjection as a result of that union. And that's the way you're living your life. That's the direction you're pointing. And here's something else. Yes, I totally agree. Depression is this huge issue, and there are so many factors to depression that we don't even have time to talk about here. But choices. You had choices to make. Okay. You could have, quite a few times you chose poorly, but you always came back around to making the right choice. So fail, 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 success, fail, 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 success. You were always, I think, based on your story, that you were always really, truly trying to move towards success. You just had some speed bumps. You had some stops. You had some things that really tried to get in your way, but you eventually found a way around. Yep. And so, and that's tremendous. So many people, you know, the culture these days, because I talk to so many faith-based men, and it's like choice has been, we're trying to constantly find a reason that we don't have a choice. And it's to justify poor behavior. That's all it is. Well, I have this condition. I have that condition. I don't do well with people. Take your pick. All right. But you found yourself almost beat to death in the desert. And did these guys ever come find you again?
No.
They just let it go.
They just let it go. As far as I know, they did. You know, it's like
that was paid.
Yeah.
You know, they probably figured if the dude survived that, we don't want to mess with him. So
yeah. Right.
You know.
Yes.
But here you are now these are scenes that people see in movies, and they don't realize, no, this stuff happens. All right. So you found yourself in the typical movie scene where you're in the desert. Nobody knows who you are. You're unrecognizable. And welders took pity on you and were like, hey, we have got to help this dude, even though a whole trailer court full of people turned a blind eye.
Yep.
Right? Choices. Once again, choices. They chose not to help you. The other men chose to help you. So once again, you could have given up. You had every reason to just cash out right there. You had every reason to be suicidal at that point. You had every reason to be down on yourself. You had every reason to push towards something negative. You had every reason to buy what the world was telling you about yourself. Yep. And you chose otherwise. You put Christ in it. You pushed towards a new creation, whether I think you realized it or not. You understood, though, that as a Christian, that made the difference. That makes a difference, and that continues to make a difference. It's what fuels what you're doing. And that those old decisions and those old experiences, they have definitely contributed to who you are today, but now not in a negative sense. Now you have a tremendous story to tell that can change the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of men.
And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that it just touches, just one soul at least.
Yeah.
That's it. And just to know that there's still hope.
And you and I can talk further offline at some point about how, if you really want to get your story out there, you can. So.
Okay.
So.
And then also one other thing too, during the youth rally, one of the kids had asked me, did you go back to the welding shop after? And the answer is yes, I did.
Yeah.
So I did go back, and I brought, I brought a cake and some cupcakes to them. And then of course, one of the guys there were like, they told me, they were like, wow. They're like, we know who you are. We remember you. We remember that night. And this was about a month later. And were like, they told me that, yeah, and then they pointed out, Cliff. He's like, Cliff's the one that actually gave you CPR while the ambulance was en route and kept you alive. So, and of course I hugged them all and I thanked them and I told them I'm grateful that they did what they did.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because gratitude is key. And I think gratitude is a tool that, quite honestly, most men have forgotten about. We get so wrapped up in our lives and our experiences that we forget to be grateful for even the smallest things. Gratitude can make a tremendous difference. And the fact that you went back there and showed those dudes gratitude shows a lot about your character, buddy.
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for coming on. If anybody wants to talk to you or message you directly, or kind of look at your story, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Facebook, Christopher Martinez, Manhattan, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty easy. My face is right there. You can't miss me. So.
Yeah, I can attest to that. He is.
And then also the Church of Christ in Belgrade.
Yep, Church of Christ in Belgrade. Okay, so for everybody that's listening, I hope you guys got something out of it. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook and you want to hear the podcast, you can find us on Anchor, iTunes, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Radio Public, Castbox, Breaker, and Spotify. And as I always like to say, about a million other podcast platforms that I probably haven't even heard of. Also, you can contact us or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and like I said, YouTube, and it's all under The Sedated Man. If you want to talk to me directly, you can find me at mike@thesedatedman.com. That's mike@thesedatedman.com. Now, if you want the show notes for this one, I have a couple scriptures there, although we didn't go over them today. I have a couple scriptures there that pertain specifically to the new creation, and you'll find those on my Patreon page, and that's patreon.com/thesedatedman. And that's where all of the past show notes and current show notes are. A lot of tools and a lot of things you can use to help you get through whatever you're going through right now. So with that, Chris, once again, thank you very, very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.